We the people of the state of Jefferson, ever mindful of the rights we hold most dear, life, liberty, and property, are compelled to establish this, our new state, for the preservation of these natural inalienable rights. Our mandate for the protection of life, liberty, and property gives urgent voice to our demand for representation that reflects our needs, our history, our culture, and our moral imperatives. Time has come for 51. This is Terry Rapoza.
And Wynn Carpenter. You're listening to Jefferson State of Mind podcast.
How you doing, everybody? We're going to be talking with someone here who is, in my opinion, probably one of the top constitutionalists in the United States. Also somebody here who is going to lead us down a path of where liberty really is. And so this is Mark Baird. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
Every day is a blessing, Terry. How are you?
Well, you know, the fun never stops here.
Yep.
So anyway, tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
Well, I came to this kind of late in life, as did most of us, when I observed the palpable lack of liberty when departments of Fish and Game and Water Resources were coming to take our water. And my wife and I finally realized that it's okay to say no. In fact, it's our God-given right to say no, and it would be a shame and theft if we don't say no. So that's how I got here. I'm a rancher, a father, a Christian, a pilot. Been many things in my life, but right now I'm trying to fight to regain the liberty that we squandered.
Yeah, it is a restoration, that's for sure. I think the thing we want to go back to in this first segment is to talk about how we got here. How did California get here?
Well, California got here the same way the rest of the states got here, and that was by not following the tenets and principles of the government that were laid out for us by our fathers and our forefathers. In fact, the principles that they paid for with their blood, their treasure, and their sacred honor. There are two schools of thoughts in this nation right now. One is that God is above all of us. Our liberty comes from God. We have natural laws, William Blackstone said, and John Locke said, and Montesquieu said, and so many, Marcus Cicero and so many before them said. We have rights that are inherent to us because we're human beings, and those rights come from the divine, from God. And so those rights are the rights that we want to protect the most, and that's the reason that we formed government. In fact, our Declaration of Independence says that. It says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that to protect those rights, governments were instituted among men. In other words, this was not a nation filled with government waiting for us to show up so they could govern us. This was a nation filled with people, starting with the Mayflower Compact and with Indian nations before that. And we literally, as Blackstone and Locke said, we formed government. The people formed government in order to protect the liberty they hold most dear. And those are the inalienable rights: the right to life, liberty, property, the right to self-defense, the right to be secure in your person and papers in your home, the right to have a public and speedy trial, and so on and so forth. Now, the other school of thought is that government is above all. Government is God, and that people serve government. And therefore, by its very nature, there is one set of rules for those who govern, and then there's another set of rules for all the rest of us, and they're not subject to our rules, and we cannot enjoy their rules because we're not one of them. And we have both of those schools of thought at work in this nation today. And that's really important for people to understand. And there were a couple of Supreme Court cases that literally got us to the point where we are now. This fight has been going probably since the day after the Constitution was signed. The gal that asked Benjamin Franklin out in the hall or out in the street after the Constitutional Convention, and she said, Mr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us? And he said, a republic if you can keep it.
Yes.
And so people were striving against the Constitution probably the day after it was signed. But in the progressive era, it got much worse. Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Johnson, and so on, it became much worse. And that was where really we started losing our liberty. And in this nation, we have a principle called the federal model of government, where each state, in other words, the geography of each state, is protected by two senators. Each and every state, little states, big states, they only get two. And then the assembly was apportioned by population, and that was called the Connecticut Compromise. And the founders did that very, very distinctly, very intentionally, in order that little states and smaller areas will not be overrun by the populous areas, so that they would have no say in the government that affects them the most. And in California, we actually had that.
Yes.
Prop 28, passed in 1926, gave Californians the federal plan of government, they called it, where by and large each county had one state senator. And there were a few exceptions, like Mono County only had 1,000 people. But the rule was no more than 3 counties, and those counties had to be contiguous. They had to touch. And then in 1962, there was a series of Supreme Court cases going from 1962 to 1964. The first one was Baker versus Carr. And this is very interesting, because the federal government, since its inception, has been trying to destroy states' rights. Now remember, the people, and therefore the states, formed the federal government.
Yes.
They signed the contract that created the federal government, not the other way around.
Yes.
The federal government is a construct of the people.
It's a product.
And its powers are narrowly defined in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. That defines all the powers that the federal government has.
Yes.
And they are to have no other power than those illustrated in Article 1, Section 8. So now we come to a place where the federal government wants to usurp power from the states, and they want to have the air of legitimacy. So they had a series of court cases. The first one was Baker versus Carr, and that's where the federal government, through its judiciary and Article 3 courts, gave itself the power to intervene in state election processes, and that was 1962. Then the second case was Gray versus Sanders, where the principle of one man, one vote was created. And Chief Justice Earl Warren, who was a governor of California, he was also the Attorney General for the state of California, he said in Gray versus Sanders that all elections must be conducted on the principle of one man, one vote, because counties don't deserve individual representation, because they're not legal subdivisions, they're simply political arms of the state. Well, Warren never read the Constitution of the United States, because he didn't have the power to do that. Article 3 courts don't have the power to change state constitutions. And also, he never read the California Constitution, because Article 11, Section 1 says counties are legal subdivisions of the state. So in that sense, then he created one man, one vote. And then he thought to himself, and they talked about this in legal journals, that no state would ever challenge the federal government again because of these decisions. Well, 30 court challenges later, Warren decided to put the nail in the box of states' rights. And that case was called Reynolds versus Sims, where the federal government, through the Article 3 court, the Supreme Court, opined, their opinion was that the federal government has the power to take precedence in all state electoral processes.
Oh my gosh.
In other words, states don't have the power to regulate their own elections. The federal government has that power. And that was in 1964. Now, remember, California up to this point had less than $5 billion in long-term debt. We had the most productive state in the union. Our economy was growing. We were building things. People were free, happy. People were coming here. They were making money. Their kids were getting jobs here and living here, so on and so forth. By about 1985, we hit $30 billion in long-term debt, and it's been a skyrocket ever since.
Yeah.
I mean, now we're over to, some people say, $3.5 trillion in long-term debt. And we have a state that's out of control because there is no check on the power of the mob. That's how the Connecticut Compromise worked. It was that the Senate would be a deliberative body and all parts of the nation would be represented so that they could check the power of the urban centers. In fact, Justice Frankenfurter said, if we do this, we'll create a nation that has an entirely city point of view. And right now there are 15 major cities that control all elections in the United States, and you can't outvote them. And even in California, We have in the state of Jefferson, which is about 23 counties, we have a total of 6 state-level representatives, senators and assemblymen combined. Los Angeles County alone has 15 state senators. Who's going to win those arguments? Why are our communities dying? Why do we live under these ridiculous mandates like you can't have a gasoline lawnmower?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Crazy.
can you see me out haying with an electric baler, an electric swather, an electric bale wagon? Is my semi truck going to be electric? And you pull hay to market with an electric truck that has a range of 30 miles? I mean,
Yeah, you know, and you made such a good point about how the Senate has been broken down and how the Assembly has been. I mean, we have 2 senators in the area you subscribed, and Los Angeles County has 15,
Right.
11 of which are just for Los Angeles County. The other 4 just have parts of it.
the other 4 share parts of other
counties too.
but they also represent
Also Los Angeles. I mean, that's 15. That's insane out of 40. That's
And we've had many assembly people and many state senators tell us that their districts are so large they can't possibly represent counties adequately because one county might want something different than the neighboring county. Well, where's their loyalty going to lie? Where
Yeah.
the money is.
Hey, you know, we've got about 4 minutes here, but I think we have time for you to explain the original apportionment that was capped in 1862.
For California?
For California.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the original apportionment was capped in 1862 because the legislature of California didn't want the growing Chinese population to have any access to political power.
Discrimination.
Well, just a little. and in addition to that, they did not want to share power with newcomers. They thought, hey, we've got this little kingdom. The crown's pulled down tight around our ears. Why in the living heck would we want to share that with anybody? Why do we want to spread that wealth? Why do we want people in every corner of the state to have equal access to liberty and equal access to power? And the answer is we don't. And remember, I'm a former peace officer, and so I know this, and there are only 3 reasons for all crimes: sex, money, and power. And in politics, all 3 are there. This has nothing to do with the Wuhan. This has nothing to do with the supply chain disruption. This has nothing to do with any of that stuff. It has nothing to do with the fish, the environment, saving the world. It has to do with money and power and who has it and who can keep it from you having your share of it. And who can keep you from having your liberty, because under the second system where God is above all, they create a system where Joe Biden doesn't wear his mask in a restaurant, but you'd get kicked out or maybe arrested for doing it, for not wearing yours.
Unbelievable.
Well, and that's minor, but you see where it goes. These little things lead to big things, and pretty soon you have no access to liberty. Someone else is telling your children what they're going to learn. Someone else is telling you what you're going to get jabbed into your body. Someone else is telling you what job you can have, whether you can buy or sell, whether you can travel, whether you can do all of these things. Do you really think that Thomas Paine and Dr. Joseph Warren, who died on Bunker Hill, do you really think they imagined that for this nation?
No.
I can't think that
No.
they did. And yet, here we are.
Well, that's, you know, it really kind of, I know in another segment here, we're going to be talking about that representation issue. But I'd like to close this one out with, where do you think that there's going to be a tipping point for people?
All I can say is what Patrick Henry said to the Virginia Burgesses. He looked at the room and he said, "What would gentlemen have?" In other words, he looked at him, he says, "What do you want in a perfect world? What do you guys want?" And they all started yelling, "We want peace, we want peace," And he said, "Open your ears." He says, "There is no peace." He says, "Is life so sweet or peace so dear to be purchased at the price of slavery and chains? Almighty God forbid it, for I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death."
Wow. Well, with that, my good friend, we're going to wrap up this first segment. Again, this is Mark Baird, Terry Rapoza, and Mark, we're going to go into our second segment here in a bit. We'll be talking about the Second Amendment, which I know is near and dear to your heart. So everybody, thanks for watching. There'll be more of this, and we have to understand that we need to restore our liberty, restore our freedom, and protect our country.
Amen.
How you doing, everybody? This is Terry Rapoza. I'm here with Mark Baird, the spokesman for the state of Jefferson, among many, many, many other things. And we're going to talk about a very important subject here, the Second Amendment. Because as we all know, without the second, nothing else can be protected. The second's there to protect the first and the rest.
Amen to that.
So, my friend, roll away.
Well, we have in this nation, we have a Constitution. And the Constitution was written very expressly in order to guarantee the rights of the people in exchange for the several states becoming part of this entity we call the United States of America. Remember, when the Revolutionary War was over, we had only the Declaration of Independence, and that declared that we had 13 separate but equal nations, equal on the world stage with any nation in the world and capable of doing all those things, making war, making peace, borrowing money, paying it off, protecting the rights of their citizens. So then, after that, we instituted a form of government called the Articles of Confederation. And in that 10 years, we had 10 presidents of the United States before the Constitution of the United States.
That's interesting.
Was formed.
Yeah.
So a lot of people think the Constitution's our founding document, and that's wrong. It's not. It's our second try. And you can tell that because in the preamble it says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." Well, that's kind of a funny thing to say. Why wouldn't you just say a perfect union? Because we'd already done this and it didn't work. And so the Constitution was our second try, and there was a lot of wrangling, but in the end it was signed, and the authors of that document are the states and the people who make the states up. And once again, I'm going to repeat myself, but it's important for you to know and important for everyone to know. This was not an empty place filled with government waiting for you to show up so they could tell you what to do. This was a land filled with people from the Mayflower Compact and before, and expanded, and finally people realized that they needed to form a society. People form societies. And in doing that, you spell out the rules. You spell out the rules for yourself, because when you form a society voluntarily, which we did with the Constitution of the United States, there are rules that everyone has to live by. In other words, I am willing to delegate certain freedoms temporarily to the government that I formed to serve me and to secure the liberties that I hold most dear. For example, I agree not to go 100 miles an hour in a school zone. Now, I'm free to do that because no one can stop my foot from pushing on the gas pedal. But I agree not to do that because it might infringe on the life, liberty, and property of someone else. But I do those things so that the government I form to serve me will protect me and protect the liberty I hold most dear from the next biggest dog on the block that would take my liberty away from me. Communities were formed to protect people from having the state usurp their liberty. States were formed to protect the federal government from taking their liberty and from the king taking their liberty and whoever else of foreign powers taking their liberty. But we retain the liberties we hold most dear. The first one is the First Amendment, the right to speak freely, to worship, to freedom of the press, the right to peacefully assemble, the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. Now, these days it's very popular for young people to say, well, the Constitution is old and we need to change it. All right, it was written by old people who had old ideas, and we really need to change that. So I want you to ask yourself, which part of it do they really want to change? Do they want to change the part in Article 2 where it says the president serves for 4 years? Do they want to change the part in Article 3 where it says Congress has the power to institute inferior courts to the Supreme Court? Do they want to change Article 1 where it says that the House of Representatives serves for so many years and the Senate serves for so many years? No, that's not the part they want to change. They want to change the part where you get things, and that's the Bill of Rights. Now, the Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution later, in I think it was 1793, and then finally ratified, I believe, in 1803. I can't remember. And that was the bone that the Federalists threw the Anti-Federalists because they weren't going to sign the thing. A lot of smaller states were not going to sign the Constitution because it didn't guarantee the liberty of the people who authored the document. And so they wanted these amendments, and there's an argument as to whether there were 10 or 12, and I'm not going to get into that because it's too long a discussion, but the Bill of Rights that we ended up with today, by hook or crook, whatever it was, protects the liberty that the people hold most dear. The First Amendment, free speech, and the other four items I listed. And the Second Amendment is the right to keep and bear arms. Now, why do we have that? Because we have the absolute right, and the Declaration of Independence declares that our life is one of the inalienable rights. Well, I just have a question to ask you. It's a simple question. What good is your life if someone can take it anytime they want to? What good is your property if someone can take it anytime they want to? What good is your liberty if someone can take it anytime they want to, whether they be from the government or from a private source? What good are those things to you if you can't defend those things? And William Blackstone and John Locke and Montesquieu and Cicero even went further, because they said that inalienable rights, in other words, natural rights, where God presides over the earth and your rights come from him naturally as a free and independent human being, are very important, because those are rights that are born with you. They attach to you. You cannot give them away. You cannot sell them unless you cease to be a human being. However, you can fail to exercise them either by force or voluntarily. And we are now in a position where we fail to exercise our inalienable rights because the government forces us to abdicate those liberties to whom? Oh, I know, to them. So the Second Amendment is very important, because in Cruikshank versus United States, the Supreme Court ruled that the Second Amendment is wholly undependent upon government because it predates government. It is unconnected with militia service because it predates the militia. It attaches to the individual no matter where he is, and further, the right itself declares that it shall not be infringed. Now, Cruikshank was an 1800s case. And then again in Heller, and again in Wren, and again in McDonald v. Chicago, again and again and again, this right has been affirmed. So you have to ask yourself, well, if all that stuff you just said is true, how come I can't go outside and protect myself and wear my pistol wherever I want to?
Right.
Well, the reason is because the federal courts have stolen your liberty with the consent, permission, and I believe collusion of government, and we allowed that to occur. In California for 250 years, during Spanish rule, during Mexican rule, during the first 150 years of California rule, it was unremarkable, unregulated, and basically something that no one even noticed. And you could carry your gun outside your pants and outside your shirt,
you wanted.
And you could walk into any building, any government building, anywhere you wanted to, and no one would say a word to you. And that stopped in 1968 under that champion of liberty, Ronald Reagan, because the Black Panther Party, about 20 guys, and you have your thoughts about the Black Panthers, so do I, but it's irrelevant to the discussion. Well, they had a protest in Sacramento, and they took some old M1 carbines and some bird guns, and they went to the Capitol, and they were marching around with their communist flag and, you know, pretending they were tough guys. And some legislative aide, they asked to be let into the gallery of the California Senate, and some aide made a mistake and let them onto the Senate floor. And you can imagine how horrified all of those champions of liberty were in the Senate floor when a bunch of African-American men toting guns were walking around among their desks and chanting communist slogans or whatever they were doing. So it wasn't long before the California Assembly, the California Senate, with the help of the National Rifle Association, by the way, because they helped author the Mulford Act, and they banned the carry of loaded weapons openly. Now, why did they do that? They did that to keep urban black people from being armed and being able to defend themselves. But unfortunately, that pendulum's always swinging. So in order to take their liberty, they took yours too. And guess what? Nobody said a word. And then in 2012 and 2013, this little moron, Anthony Portantino, who, by the way, his claim to political fame was he was the art director on the Grizzly Adams TV show, and that catapulted him to statewide prominence, and he is a state senator now, but he was an assemblyman for years. He said, quote, "You don't need a cheeseburger, you don't need a gun to go buy a cheeseburger." And so him and his Democratic buddies passed a law that you could not openly carry an unloaded weapon either. So now, you can't carry a loaded weapon, you can't carry an unloaded weapon. So if the Second Amendment shall not be infringed, what do we do? Oh, I know. You can go to a sheriff and drop down on your knees and beg his permission to allow you, if you pay enough money and go to enough training, and if you are okay with the guy and he's okay with you and he's not mad at you for any reason, and he doesn't get mad at you down the road, he may give you permission to carry for 2 years, and then you got to do it all again. So I sued him over that. I said, my contention is that they have legislatively banned the Second Amendment, and Murdoch v. Pennsylvania and many, many, many other Supreme Court cases says you cannot turn a right into a permission, and a permission isn't a right. So what is a right? What is a right? What's the definition of a right? And this is important because if you cannot define liberty, you cannot preserve it. And if you cannot define tyranny, you cannot defeat it. A right is something that is inherent in you as a human being. In fact, California Constitution, if anybody's ever read that, Article 1, Section 1 says we are born free and independent human beings. That's our nature. And as such, we enjoy certain unalienable rights. Among those is the pursuit and possession of property and the protection of that property and the ability to pursue privacy and safety. That's our individual ability. It has nothing to do with government.
Nothing to do with government.
Right. So those things are our right, given to us by the God who created this universe. And if you allow a bunch of idiots in Sacramento to steal that from you, then I think God would probably be upset. And I think you should be upset because you're going to condemn your children to a world that you won't recognize yourself. And so I'm fighting that. But let's ask ourselves about rights. So the government says they have the right to protect people from one another. But they don't really. First of all, what is a right? It's given to an individual human being by God. Governments do not have rights.
No.
They can't have them.
Right.
Governments are inanimate objects. Only people can have rights.
They're a product.
Right. So only individuals can have rights. Now they call it a collective right. Well, what is a collective right? Well, that's something that the government says everybody can do. Well, it's not a right if the government tells everybody they can do it, huh? It's only a right if you can just do it without asking. It's a permission. That's right. So in the Second Amendment, we have something very interesting because this is a test. Now, and they're leaning more toward usurping other rights. You go to a college campus, you have to get permission to speak freely. There's a place you have to go. You got to stand in a chalk box, And if you stand in this chalk box,
free speech zone.
if you stand in the chalk box, and if someone says it's okay, then you might be able to speak freely if you get a permission slip from them. But that's not a right. That's a permission. And so I think the Second Amendment is something that we had all better protect because their history is replete with situations where they didn't protect that. Mao's China is one of them.
Yep.
In 1936,
Germany.
1936, they took all the guns, and then Mao killed 70 million of his own people. And same in Germany.
Yep.
Same in Venezuela. The same in I could name country after country. And in fact, in Afghanistan right now, the Taliban are running around rounding up personal arms because you don't need those anymore. You're safe now. And I'm really getting to where I hate.
Unbelievable.
I really hate the expression "stay safe" out there. Stay safe now, because your safety is your responsibility, not mine.
Yes.
And in California and most states in the Union, California Government Code 821, 845, and 846 says the government has no duty and no responsibility to protect you from crime.
Police don't have to.
Or violence or anything else. And further, even if they allow a known criminal to escape, if they allow it and he kills you, they're not liable. They cannot be held liable for acts of omission or commission when it fails to guarantee the safety of an individual citizen. And in Warren versus D.C., Martinez versus California, Riss versus New York, Gonzalez versus Cortez County, Duchesne versus Pacifica Police, Ballesteri versus Pacifica Police, Duchesne versus Winnebago County, the Supreme Court and many federal courts have affirmed time after time after time after time the government has no duty and no responsibility to protect you from anything. That responsibility belongs to you and solely to you, and the Second Amendment is your guarantor that you have the ability and the tools required to do that job for yourself.
As in closing here, folks,
these are great things to learn, great things to understand. But remember, the Constitution is only a piece of paper unless you use it. And what Mark just said, we need to go ahead and have action behind that. We shall not comply.
I will not submit. That's what I say.
I agree. We will not submit. All right, brother, thank you so much. And
Time has come for 51, man.
I agree with that. Let's get it done.
Yeah.
Hey, CA, come out and play. Have you seen the bill we all have to pay? It's not our bill, we had no say. You don't serve us, you serve LA. The time has come for 51 in a Jefferson state of mind. You don't know us, you have no clue. Still you're telling us what to do. We don't know you or what you face. It's time to start a brand new state. The time has come for 51 in a Jefferson state of mind. Jefferson state of mind, carved from lessons we all